Welcome. First of all, welcome. This is Unsolicited Perspective. I'm Bruce Anthony, your host, here to lead the conversation on important events and topics that are shaping today's society. Join the conversation and follow us wherever you get your audio podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for our video podcasts. Rate, review, like, comment, share. Share with your friends, share with your family, hell, even share with your enemy. On today's episode, I'll be interviewing Matthew Solomon. He's an award-winning filmmaker, best-selling author, integrated leadership consultant, transformative social change expert. We're going to be talking about his life, his movie, his books, his work. That's enough of the intro. Let's get to the interview. Like I said at the top, I'm here with Matthew Solomon, award-winning filmmaker for the film Reimagining Safety, best-selling author for Man School, relating with women in the Me Too era. Matthew, thank you so much for joining with me today. I'm happy to finally get you on the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Bruce. I'm looking forward to talking with you and getting into it. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, so let's start at the top.
Mhm.
Where did it all begin? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your upbringing, and how you got into the field that you're in now?
Yeah, I mean, when you ask, like, how did it all begin? It literally began like at the beginning, second grade, little Matthew Solomon. Look, I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in the West Hollywood part of Los Angeles. My schools that I went to were always very integrated, very diverse. So, my friends were everybody. I was usually like the only black. I'm sorry. I was usually the only white. That's interesting. I was usually the only white person, in my group, or there were very few of us in our friend group. And so at an early age, I was aware that my black friends in particular were treated differently, not just by police, but when we go to the mall or things like that. So I had this awareness of like social disparities and disproportionate experiences and things like that. And then, going through high school, and then when I went to college the first time, I was going to USC as a music student. And I was really interested and fascinated with sociology and anthropology. So in addition to my music classes, my general eds were sociology and anthropology. And so learning about systems and societies and things like that. And so we were literally learning about systemic racism at the same time as the Rodney King beating, and that was everywhere. And it was the first time that it was like, oh, this is what's happening, and it still seemed like an isolated event, but my friends were like, no, this is like what it's like, and then those officers were acquitted, which was shocking to a lot of us. And then the LA riots, came after that. And so I always kind of had that social justice kind of awareness, even though I was a professional musician. I started filmmaking, writing and directing scripted films. And then I was also very interested in personal development. And so I was always taking seminars on relationships and communication and business and things like that, because I wanted to be a better person, a better partner, more successful. But along the way, I learned conflict resolution and the skills that go along with that. And I've always been very interested in communication and relationships and how we relate to each other. We're not taught how to do this unless we seek it out. And so I started doing conflict resolution work before the pandemic, and I was traveling and doing services, providing, facilitating, but also teaching and things like that. And then when the pandemic started and we couldn't go anywhere, I decided to go back to school. And so I went into a master's in public administration program. And this was, first year of COVID. It was after George Floyd was murdered. It was all, the Black Lives Matter protests and the political pushback against that. And so I was applying the public administration coursework around sustainability and community engagement and transformative leadership and things like that to the issues with policing and incarceration, and got really interested in, well, what are the alternatives then? And so the last part is when it came time to do my final thesis, one of my academic advisors was like, we know you know how to write a paper, but we know you're a filmmaker. Why don't you do a documentary or something as a creative project? And I laughed because I'm like, I'm a filmmaker. That's not like, easy, right?
Hmm.
Doing a documentary, that's a lot of work. But she said, do it anyway. And so I accepted the dare and
Okay.
started interviewing people. I filmed it on my iPhone. The interviews are on my iPhone. I edited on my laptop. And it became a thing that in the last year after submitting it for my course, I started doing community screenings. And so
Hmm.
we've done to date 57 community screenings across the United States. Over 70 organizations have co-hosted and supported the screenings. And we've received endorsements from the Black Panther Party in Washington State and Mono Amiga in Texas and APTP in San Francisco. And a bunch of folks in New Jersey who have been in movement work forever. So it's been really amazing. And then the film was just released on streaming services also. So Amazon, Tubi, YouTube, and Google Play. And so, the school project, and I thought I was done with the entertainment business, but
Right.
like now I'm back in it in a
Hmm.
way that really suits me. And the film has been amazing and it's being used as an educational tool, which is what I really wanted in the first place.
I want to get into reimagining safety in a minute, but I want to go back to something that you said, that you're taking all these courses and you're learning about policy and public work as the Rodney King verdict is going on. And you said that you were surprised, but you have, like you said, you grew up in rather Black community and you were basically the lone white person in a lot of Black friend groups. Were they surprised? Because I know, me being a Black man, I was like, oh, they're going to get off, because they always get off. It always surprises me when white people look at the situation and they say, well, no, they're going to go to jail. It's on videotape. And it's like, yeah, okay, we'll see. So what were the conversations that you were having at that time? Because I feel like that probably wasn't the catalyst, but maybe a really big spark to a lot of the work that you're doing now.
Mhm. Yeah, no, they were not surprised. They weren't surprised at all. In 2016 when Trump was elected, my Black friends, like, there's a whole SNL skit
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this. My Black
Mhm.
friends were like, "Yeah, no." The uprisings, protests after George Floyd was murdered. A lot of my friends, Black friends who were in movement work, were like, "Okay, we'll see. We'll see where everybody's at in a year."
Mhm.
So yeah, and that's been, as a white person who's like always trying to unpack and rediscover and uh, you know deal with the hypocrisy. And I'm Jewish also, so there's a whole
Mhm.
other level of, especially with the horror and genocide that's happening in Gaza right now, and coming to terms with, oh, all that stuff that I was taught was not true, or it was, at least heavily skewed, or there are a lot of holes in those arguments that as a child you just, tend to accept, especially being like, so here's the thing, like, my as a white person, I could accept those as truth that were being taught to me. We're
Mhm.
post-racial America, slavery ended, like civil rights, everything's great, right? We're all equal. And I can
We got a
accept
Black
that.
president.
Got a
We got a
Black
Black
president.
president.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so it's easy for me and other white folks to accept that because we don't deal generally with anything different. Whereas
Mhm.
like my Black friends were like, we would, they would go to school. And actually Cerise Castle, who she did a whole story on the LASD Sheriff's Department gangs,
Mhm.
deputy gangs. And she talks about how, like she's Black from, I think, East LA or Echo Park. And she would go to school and the cop would show up and be officer friendly. But she was like, yeah, but my friends are all getting, harassed by the cops daily.
Mhm.
Yeah, there was a conversation online the other day where somebody was like, well, how do you not recognize that stuff when you're growing up? And somebody was like, look, if there's no evidence, and we're not seeking out evidence,
Mhm.
generally, like, you're just not going to know unless you start to see it and the veil gets lifted. And then it's like, oh, now I can't unsee this.
I think most people can't identify to anything that they haven't experienced themselves, right?
Yeah.
So empathy, I'm learning as I've gotten older, is not something that everybody naturally possesses.
Mhm.
Some people have it from birth. Some people, it's a learned experience, and they only develop it after something similar happens to them where they say, oh, this is what it's like for you guys. And this is not just for Black people and white people. This is for men and women. And we're going to get into the Me Too stuff later, because I think a lot of people have some eye-opening experiences as far as that's concerned. But let's get to your film, Reimagining Safety. So can you tell my audience, you already told them where they can get it, and that's going to be in the links are going to be in the description section of both the audio and video platforms. So click on them. But can you tell us a little bit about the film and what are some of the key points in the film?
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, this started as an academic project. And so it was really important for me to have reputable, citable sources, not just activists. There are activists in the film, but I wanted a variety of perspectives because, it's important to, I think it helps, you're talking about empathy and people's lived experiences. And so when the film talks about the harms caused by policing and incarceration, the origins of that and why it persists. And so it can be challenging for people unless they're hearing from mental health professionals also, a former police officer also, a politician who ran on abolishing the police. Like that was her platform. She ran for LA mayor of Los Angeles on that platform and tied for third, which was amazing.
She ran for not defunding,
Abolishing.
abolishing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And, we'll get into this too, but defund is a
Completely different thing than
path.
abolishing.
No, well, it's a pathway, or it can be
Okay.
a pathway. So and that was one of the things that came out. I'm jumping around, but one of my takeaways that I didn't know going in is folks that talk about abolishing the police, defunding is a pathway to that. It doesn't have to go there, but it really is about, when we address the core issues behind public safety, when we address the core issues behind why people commit crimes, generally speaking, when we address the core issues, crime comes down. So when people have resources, housing, food, clothes, jobs, employment, training, things like that, healthcare, when they have that, crime is mostly driven from desperation, from poverty, and or mental health, and like all of it ties in. So when people have their needs met, they're not going to go steal or break into places. The violent crime comes down because there's nothing driving it, right? And so one of the things that abolitionists like Mariame Kaba talks about is we spend so much money on police. Like in LA, just with LAPD and the sheriff's department, it's like $7+ billion a year. And it keeps going up. And that doesn't include all the smaller municipalities. New York NYPD, I think, is like 11 billion or something a year. So it's an enormous amount of money going into militarizing police and mobilization of violence and coercion and all of that. When if we took, and Mariame Kaba talks about, we took half of that and put it into like the social services that people need and all the resources that people need, crime naturally comes down. So then we don't need all these police, so it's a process of making the punishment system, police and prisons, obsolete so that people are actually taken care of. And it's a holistic approach. So, that's those were, key takeaways. The other thing is, when we care about each other, when we care about people, we do things differently. When people are dehumanized, othered, it's easy to discard them as, oh, well, that guy's homeless. What do you expect? Or, those folks, in, the Black community, like when people talk about Black on Black crime, which is a racist trope anyway, like it others folks, it dehumanizes folks, it makes them less worthy of being safe. And so those systems perpetuate, rather than, if we look at our safest communities are the ones with the most resources. And that's shown across the board.
I hear everything that you're saying, and I absolutely agree. My not even the issue with what you said, but I have to look at how can we stop othering everybody?
Yeah.
And that's literally what this country has been built on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the core fundamental problem is that this country has been built on dividing and separating and putting people into categories. I don't know when this started, but I have my best friend is Sicilian. And I ask her all the time, I was like, what do you consider yourself, white or Sicilian? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? She says, Sicilian or Italian. It's the first thing that comes to her mind. And I say, well, I mean, yeah, but you're also white because you don't really have a choice in America. When you fill out a little form, it says white. When Italians came over here, they weren't given the white privilege in the beginning. They were treated as others. So like people of color will never, they can be adjacent to white privilege depending on circumstances, but they can never gain that type of privilege. So people of color will always kind of be othered in this country. So how can you, and I know we'll get into that later with some of your work, but if you would just take a little quick teaser, how can we create positive change within each other when we are literally others to each other?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my daily, the daily question that I wake up with is how do we move the needle? And it's, especially after 2020, in addition to, Black Lives Matter and how those protests were demonized, right? And how the media, which they always do this when like George Floyd was murdered, it was, oh, well, he was on drugs or he did this or he did, the character assassination part. But there was also the stuff with COVID and, people othering people who were wearing masks or got vaccines or didn't get vaccines or, all of that. It is ingrained in us, and it really is. So I do, and this feeds into like my conflict resolution work, which is really about, you were talking about lived experience. It's really about acknowledging another person's lived experience is not going to be the same as mine. And so if I care enough and I'm willing enough to see the world through your eyes for even a moment, like it creates connection, right? And it reduces the effects of othering and things like that. And so it's really a process. It is about doing not just anti-racism work, but decolonization work and being willing to say, okay, I have these biases. Most of them are unconscious. And it's a product of society, socialization, TV and film, and the media as a whole. There's been an investment in the othering because of capitalism and white supremacy, like that. The eugenics that was used to dehumanize Black people and indigenous people in the United States, like Hitler in Germany, pulled from that to dehumanize Jewish people and Black people and LGBTQ plus people and all of that. And so it's very intertwined and ingrained. It's the same thing that's happening with Palestinians, in Gaza and Rafah and the West Bank and all of that. It's that the structural dehumanization. So how do we change that is first recognize that and acknowledge it, and then be in community with people, get into, this is talked about in the film also. And then there's some other folks there's a book called Healing Justice Lineages that talks about the importance of addressing our own trauma and healing our individual trauma so that we can also heal our collective trauma. And a lot of what we're talking about is in the process, is included in the process of that, and recognizing where we're othering people and the effects of it. Like for me, as an empathetic child and an empathetic adult, I'm always like, why would somebody do that to somebody else? Right. And I have to fight that naive part of me and really sit with people are invested in it because they benefit from it.
Okay, let's go back to the police. Let's talk about what is Copaganda?
Copaganda. Yeah. So Copaganda is propaganda that supports police, asserts this image. Alex Vitale talks about this in the film, and then Dr. L. Jones, she's a professor from Halifax, Nova Scotia, who's in the film. Like they both talk about how we're from as children, we're socialized with this positive image of, the cops are heroes and they're friendly and they're here to help us. And, I was just having a conversation about Paw Patrol, right? The cartoon with the police dog. And so and then, growing up, it was like, we had the Dirty Harry movies and like all the I can't even watch cop shows anymore because it shows, it's like you have these cops that face the quote evil in the world, and they especially TV and film, they break the rules because the evil is so evil that police can't be confined by rules, right? And so it's justified in TV and film, and then out in the world there's no accountability for police inflicting violence and harm or planting evidence or things like that. There's very little accountability. Like it comes up, but it's very rare that police officers actually go to trial, let alone get convicted for something like that. But it's this repetitive positive image showing like, police doing no wrong. They're here to keep us safe, which that's really not the role of police. Police are here to protect property and the interest of the wealthy and the people in power. I was talking to somebody in Denver who's on the public safety task force. And he was like, city to city, it's rare that there's a definition of what police do. But in Denver, they literally say protect property, and protect, I forget how I think corporate interests or something like that, So when we look at, in reality, police really solve a very small portion of crime. Their role is to, arrest people, write tickets, under the umbrella of getting bad guys off the streets. But what that does is perpetuates cycles of violence. People get incarcerated, they come out, they have less freedom, less access to resources. They've been in this confined space that's incredibly violent. And so if you're in there even for a short amount of time, you come out, and then how do you relate to people, outside of that? And so the Copaganda part is really the propaganda that props up police, as this positive, thing, which it's not.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hear exactly what you're saying because one of my favorite shows is Law and Order SVU. And one of my longtime favorite characters, first of all, Olivia Benson, love her. But one of my longtime favorite characters was Elliot Stabler, who consistently brutalized suspects. And nobody ever really, even today, I mean, he's got his own show, Elliot Stabler, back having his own show. So it's funny. I did an interview speaking to a gentleman who wrote a book on policing, and we talked about the romanticism of police. And that is some of the reasons why people enter in the police force, but then they basically scare them straight with some of the police training. And so, that's, I'm not going to say all police are bad, but the system is.
The system is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a system that if you look at the way that they're trained and the mindset and the culture of policing, it is all about violence and control. Like it's not protect and serve, it's command and control. And,
Yes.
we see this on the, college campuses with the encampments, the anti-genocide, anti-war encampments. And when the police are called in to clear it, doesn't matter that these are 19-year-old kids. It's the riot gear and the shields and the bear spray and all of that. And it's this militarized force. And that's the culture of it. That's what's ingrained in them. And you got to you back the blue and, protect your brothers and sisters, and it's us against them. And, the mentality, I saw that interview, by the way, that you had, it was really great, and the mindset that they're programmed with in the academy, never lose a fight. You have to be in command when you walk, they call it command presence. You have to walk in, you got to, get control of the situation. You get on the street, don't take crap from anybody. You get into a fight at the drop of a hat. You got to write tickets. You got to make arrests. Like there's a book of Inconvenient Cop from a former NYPD officer who talks about the quotas that are illegal and not supposed to exist. But he's like, yeah, you got to, 4 arrests, 4 tickets, I think, and then 10, you have to 10 stops or something like that. It's 10-4-4, which none of that keeps us safe. It just aggravates everybody.
There's always that running joke, when people are driving, it's the end of the month and the beginning of the month. Hey, you got to be careful because they got to meet their quota. They're going to give you tickets out there. Yeah. You brought up something that I wanted to touch base on, and you said something about the deputy gangs in LA County. Can you explain to me exactly what that is?
Yeah. So Cerise Castle, who's a reporter with Knock LA, she was covering the George Floyd protests in 2020 and was shot in the face with a rubber bullet. And
okay, I remember that.
Had a lot of damage, was, laid up for, months. And so she talks about this. There's a 10 segment story. It's called The Tradition of Violence on Knock LA's website. She also did a podcast on it, which is really great. But she talks about how she started hearing about gangs within, like deputy gangs within, it started with stations, like different sheriff's department stations in LA County. And, she started doing the research and drilling down and finding, there are at least 13 gangs that are known of, that are named, like the Executioners, Banditos, that were tied to stations. They have like initiations. They all have tattoos.
This is the police.
The sheriff's department.
This is not citizens out on the street, LA gang culture. This is LA gang culture now being in the police department.
Yes. In the sheriff's department.
Okay.
And, it's not like in I mean, it's been said, but I remember in Boys in the Hood, they're like, LAPD, they were talking about is the biggest gang in the city, and this is, and that's LAPD as a whole. Like it's been documented that there are gangs in other police departments, but within the sheriff's department, LA County Sheriff's Department in particular, there's a ton of research that, and they've had oversight hearings, and like the deputy, I forget if it's chief or what the designation is, has a tattoo that's tied to one of the gangs, and they're like, no, it's about like, station pride, or it's about this, or it's about that. But then she's interviewed former deputy gang members. She's interviewed people who've been the victims of violence from the deputy gangs, and talk, like really gets into like the initiation process, the murders, the planting of guns and evidence, things like that. And then those deputy gang members who have raised, up through the ranks.
Wow. Okay. Oh, in your studies and your travels and you're meeting different people, does this exist only in LA or LA County, or does this exist in like Wyoming and
Mm.
Texas and Illinois and Indiana and New York and Jersey? Is this a self-contained situation,
No,
or
no,
is
no.
this spread out across the board?
Yeah, I mean, and I've been in, we've done 57 screenings across the US, like I said, and probably, we've had returns to certain areas. So I've probably been in like 30 something cities, different cities. And no, everybody considers that the police are a gang. Now, whether they have, the tattoos and all of that,
Right.
that's not as clear, as for sure with the LA County Sheriff's Department. But
Okay.
the culture of it is like a gang.
Yeah.
They're gang members, but they're backed by the state. There's very little accountability. They're given, carte blanche, basically, to do whatever they need to do. Yeah. So I remember like on that interview that you had, there were differences explained between gangs and police, right?
Mhm.
And I would take issue with that, that you all were discussing. And, but in the case of the LA County Sheriff's Department, these are like tattooed gang members.
Okay. Yeah, they have all the markings
Mhm.
of a gang. You brought
And
up
I did
something.
the thing. I'm sorry. One other thing, like if going back to the '90s and like Tupac and Biggie, and there were LAPD members, officers who were affiliated with the Bloods gangs and
Mhm.
were doing security for death row records and things like that. And so there's always been kind of like this interweaving thing, like you're talking about Italians and the Irish, and I forget the movie, but it was like one son was a cop and one son was a drug dealer.
I know what movie you're talking about. The guy that played Joker,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Joaquin
yeah.
Phoenix. Yeah,
Mhm.
he was in that
Yeah,
movie with, was it Marky Mark? What's the other brother? You can call him Mark Wahlberg all you want
yeah,
to.
I
He'll
know.
forever be Marky
Mark
Mark
Mark.
to me. But I know what movie you're talking about. And yeah, there's probably a lot of those dynamics that, one of the siblings is it's law
Mhm.
enforcement and another one is it. It's funny that you brought up the crookedness of some of the cops of playing evidence and things like that. I'm going to get comments on YouTube about this, but I'm going to say what I had to say. Rudy Giuliani was praised for taking down the mafia using the RICO statute and basically crippling the mafia, not to the point where they don't exist anymore, but to the point where they're not as powerful as they once were. What rarely ever gets talked about is the underhanded tactics of which he used
Yeah.
to get some of these things like telling people that wouldn't inform that, hey, if you don't inform, that doesn't matter. We're going to go tell them that you did, basically giving them a death sentence. So these underhanded tactics by the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, have been documented over history, but some people still just want to believe that cops and everything associated with that is just on the up and up. Because if people can't believe that, then that means the system is corrupted. And then what do they believe in? So I kind of understand why they wouldn't want to face these facts, but these are facts.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of these, like the race conversations and civil rights and social justice, like people love to invoke, Dr. King, right?
Yeah.
On all sides. And he was labeled a terrorist, the most dangerous
Communist. Yep.
communist, most dangerous for like, the United States government labeled him, one of the most dangerous people in America. The Black Panther Party were labeled as terrorists. There was COINTELPRO, where they had agents infiltrating and trying to take it down. When the story was that, oh, they were this violent terrorist group. The reality was they're protecting their communities, feeding people. Like the school lunch program, in the United States came from the Black Panther Party in the late 60s, early 70s. So they were keeping their people safe, keeping their communities safe. They were trying to hold police accountable. They were feeding students, educating. Like I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she was like, yeah, as soon as the Black Panther Party started to be about political education, that's when like things started going down, and the members were getting arrested or assassinated or, stuff like that, because it was the political education realizing, oh, we're actually, being oppressed in the system so other folks can make a lot of money, and we're actually not free like we've been told we're free.
Matthew, could you imagine if we had social media back in the 60s and
Oh,
70s?
I think about that.
Yeah, that would be absolutely amazing. I want to go back to something. I know we're going all around, but I want to go back to something that you brought up as far as quotas. Is this connected at all to officer incentives? And what are officer incentive systems?
Right. Well, so with the quotas specifically, because it's in the book, An Inconvenient Cop, he talks about that's the measure of if you're doing your job or not. And so,
Okay.
they have the 10-4-4 quota. And so, he's like, officers would be like, oh, I'm going on vacation in 2 weeks. I need to make my quota. Or like you were saying, it's the end of the month. I haven't made enough arrests. I got to make my quota. And so then you go looking for stuff, or you go planting stuff, or you go, making an arrest that won't hold up, but at least you made an arrest. Right. And so it uses people as, pawns, property. It's dehumanizing because it's all a game that somebody profits off of. When we're talking about in the incentive systems, and I know this from having talked to cops, like, once you get on the street, the way that you prove yourself and that the way you show your job is, they call it jamming people up, right? Which is like stop and frisk, like, hey, what are you doing? Let me see your ID. Like, you got to be doing that. If somebody mouths off to your partner or, you got to like jump in and take them down and fight, you have to make arrests. You got to write tickets. You got like all of the stuff that we think, is about safety just perpetuates more of the violence. But they don't have measures for how safe did you make, this area of town today. The crime stats are often tied to arrest as like the only means to really measure if people are safe or not, versus, like I was saying before, the things that actually produce safety. And so there is that incentive, and you have to prove yourself. And the whole culture of policing, you got to prove yourself to the old timers. And who are the old timers? That, that they've been around forever. They were, when, there's research from the Brennan Center and the FBI with, white supremacists infiltrating law enforcement agencies, or even being like in LAPD in the 40s, Southern officers, in quotes, were recruited, right? And who are Southern officers? Most likely to be KKK members. So it's all interwoven. And then you have the incentive, and then the racism that's ingrained, and who are the easiest populations to over police so that you can make your quotas. Generally the poorest, right? The ones with the least resources, which are generally Black and brown communities, by design, with redlining and housing discrimination, like and that's the thing, like all of those systems, including mental health and social work, all feed into policing and the policing mindset, and we have to control people and populations. We have to punish people who make mistakes or break laws or whatever, regardless. Like that was one of the things from sociology back in the 90s was, the whole thing about like somebody would go to jail for stealing a loaf of bread, but we had at the time these savings and loan, the savings and loan scandal, the guy that did that, Michael Milken, like he went to like a country club prison,
Hmm.
nothing really happened. But if you steal a loaf of bread because, your kids are hungry, like you're in jail in like one of the most violent systems, being like LA County, California, one of the most violent systems in the country.
Whew, that's a lot on police.
Yeah.
Let's talk about safety of women. You wrote a
Okay.
book,
Yeah.
Man School, relating with women in the Me Too era. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and a little bit about the Me Too era and what men need to learn about that era?
Yeah. So it's really like it kind of comes about through the same lens, which is if we care about people, we would do things differently. If we set aside or if we acknowledge that we all have certain lived experiences based on our gender, skin color, religion, you know, physical abilities or disabilities, things like that, right? And so when the Me Too movement happened online, now Me Too was started by a Black woman named Tarana Burke in 2006, and she often does not get she doesn't get enough credit. She often doesn't get credit for that. But so she started Me Too, and then around 2017, 2018, with the Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and all of that, the hashtag Me Too, the online movement was started, co-opted, started, and women were sharing their stories online.
Mhm.
And so a lot of what was happening was men not being in that lived experience would push back and be like, well, that doesn't make sense. You must have done this or you must have done that, or it couldn't be that bad or whatever. And negating the lived experiences of mostly women. There were some men too, but mostly women who were sharing their stories. And so because I've been involved in this type of work for a long time, I was engaging with men, on mostly Facebook, and women were like, "Oh, you get it. We're exhausted. Please write a book or teach a class or something." And
Mhm.
so, I wrote the book because I figured that would be like, who's going to come to a class, right?
Right.
So I wrote the book. It's short. It's like 73 pages or something, but it's really about relationships and acknowledging other people's lived experiences and how we can listen better, how we as men at the time, and it's this was 2018, so the book is very like gender binary, like, men and women. There's not really a lot in between. That's something I would probably do differently now. But, it's interesting because the whole thing about like the man or the bear thing has just come up,
Yeah.
on social media. But it really is about our personal development as men. Like, how can we show up and really be confident and strong in who we are, but also being sensitive. And, in my work, transformative leadership, the leaders who have inspired me that I've been inspired to follow are always the ones who've had compassion and empathy and knew who I was, cared about who I was, cared about what I was interested in. Like, those are the people that I would, go to battle for.
Mhm.
It's the ones that are like putting on this fake vibrato and the alpha, like whatever, and I'm in charge. Like, I have no respect for folks like
Mm.
that, So it's really about, like you were saying at the beginning, like developing empathy and compassion and acknowledging that we all have different lived experiences based on how we grew up and who we grew up with and how we show up in the world.
Yeah, I've had to check a couple of male friends of mine since the whole Diddy
Mhm.
scandal has come out. And before the video, they were like, I don't understand why she just didn't go to the police. And, why didn't she just leave? And I'm like, bro, it's like you really don't understand power dynamics. And,
Yeah.
and these conversations are important, but also I understand why women are just absolutely exhausted talking about it. It's kind of like me being a Black man trying to explain to somebody who isn't Black about racism. And they're like, I just don't get it. And I'm like, hey, you know what? My head hurts.
Yeah.
Go read a book. And that's what I wanted to say to men. So go read Matthew's book so you can learn something. You do other work as well. And you do a lot of work that focuses on leadership and partnership and intimacy. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So for me, and it all ties in, right? The leaders that I've been inspired by, when I talk about intimacy, a lot of times we think it's, sex and relationships, but intimacy is really getting to know people at a deep level, like being able to share with each other, like, this is what's going on with me, or this is why I'm feeling or responding this way, and so when we can do that for each other, and I've seen this, I've facilitated this, but it came out of me experiencing this in my years of work as a student of personal development and transformation and things like that. Like, when we're open and honest with each other and we listen to each other in a way that acknowledges and has somebody feel heard and valued, a lot of the othering that we were talking about, a lot of the misconceptions and the judgments disappear, and we relate to each other on a human personal level. And so for me, leadership, partnership, and intimacy are three pillars, because the real leaders who inspire people to not only follow, but to lead to lead as well, develop that intimacy and know how to create partnership. We get things done by being in partnership with each other. Or, if we look at it from a decolonial aspect, like we were talking about before, being in community. What are we doing together? What are we working towards together? How can we use our varied talents and things? I'm good at this part, you're good at that part. Great, let's do that together and make it move, get it moving. So that's where all of that comes from. And I as a facilitator, when I go into organizations, more times than not, there's a hierarchy where the people at the top are almost completely cut off by people in the middle, definitely cut off from people at the bottom. Different departments are siloed off, so nobody knows who's what or who's doing what or how to do what. And so there's always these breakdowns, and ultimately people trying to cover themselves so they don't lose their job. And so it becomes not about, like, in a university setting, it becomes not about serving the students and what does the university stand for and how are we growing and expanding. It's, I got to get tenure. I got to cover my butt. I got to, don't want to talk about DEI because I'll get blowback from the community. I don't want to address that there are race or gender issues on campus because, so we'll just bring in somebody to do like a 1 hour talk or a 4 hour training. So we can say we did and check that box, but nothing ever changes. So when we approach community from a place of really investing in each other and what's going to serve everybody, then we start to make changes that actually benefits everybody.
So I have a question, because I dig everything that you're saying. However, I know there's going to be pushback. I know that there is pushback. There's going to be people saying, Bruce had this guy named Matthew, the super ultra liberal who wants to hug everybody and love everybody and sing Kumbaya. And he doesn't realize that we live in a conservative capitalistic country, and it's all about survival of the fittest. How do we get through to those people?
Yeah.
Because there's a whole section, at least half of this country has that type of mentality.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a couple things. Go ahead.
And I was just like, how do we reach those? How do we beat it in their head? Not literally, but get it to the point where they understand, like, if we live this way, it's better for everybody. This will benefit you as well. It's not taking anything away from you. It's going to benefit you.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, I'm much more to the left than liberal, which brings me to, I'm not about kumbaya. And I mean, I love hugs, but I also get that you got to fight for stuff, and there's liberatory revolutionary practices, and you got to tear down the system, right? And replace it with the stuff that works. And so how do we do that? Fred Hampton was building coalitions with white folks and the young lords and all of that, because there's power in coalition,
and the Latinos that were in Chicago,
and the Latinos, all of that, so here's where I'm at, because this has been an evolving thing, and like I said, I wake up with this every day. Like, how do we get more people to see it? So my film, Reimagining Safety, when white liberals see the film, and I see liberal as closer to center or right than left. And this is just so framing this conversation in that, when white liberals see the film, who are in a place where it's like, yeah, there's problems. Yeah, we need to fix the problems, but what are you going to do? And then they see, and they're afraid of defund the police, right? They're like, oh, we can't defund the police. But then they see the film and how it's explained and how the solutions are already happening. There are violence prevention teams all over the country. There are community responders, all over, in various parts of the country, right? These are things that are working. So when people see the film, they're like, oh, I get it now. And then that changes their minds. And then they start to, address each other and the systems, from that place. When we're talking about, there's probably, I would assert that there are some folks who are not going to be reachable, and that's fine. And by getting people to see through media, through, and I think, like, that's the other thing too, as one of the reasons that I was on board with doing a film is because who's going to go out and read the 20 something books that I've read on this? Not a lot of people, but you put a, 83-minute movie, and people are going to, and it sparks conversation. When we do the community screenings, then people get to connect with the leaders in their communities who are doing this work. So it's as a filmmaker, I see a responsibility in changing up, stereotypes and tropes, storyline tropes, casting tropes, like what race plays what characters, or how are people seen, and creating new storylines. Now, Hollywood is a whole other establishment, but there's a lot more avenues for people to get content out, and self-distribute, or there are other platforms, that you can, get like with Reimagining Safety. It would have been great to be on like HBO or Netflix or whatever, even though Netflix is not great for filmmakers, but I wanted as many people to see it as possible.
Yeah, as many platforms as possible. Yeah.
And so there's a company called Indie Rights, which is basically, they support self-distribution, but they have direct paths to Amazon, Tubi, YouTube, Google Play. They also go to all the film markets and, pitch it and all of that. But I knew that I would at least be on 4 platforms, that are different levels of accessibility, where anybody can see the film. So it's that. So it's our storytelling. It's our education, our education. Like, we got to educate people on the harms and the alternatives and all of that. And it is a fight. Like, I feel very honored to be in community with the Black Panther Party and the Panther Party in Washington State, and we communicate a lot. And like, they are very much a revolutionary organization. And a big part of that is about divesting from the system and not
Mhm.
participating, you know. And so they do trainings on growing your own food and conflict resolution, and they'll do like, they do self-defense and things like that. And so it's not really the kumbaya part, but it's being in community and not relying on these systems that are these systems of oppression.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Matthew, sometimes you just got to let people know, hey, look, I'm all for peace, but I can also punch you in your face. And
Yeah, and I
to
mean,
get the point across. I mean, sometimes you just got to let people know that, hey, look, we can
yeah,
have a conversation or we can have a different conversation. It's however you want to take it, but I'm going to get
yeah.
my point across. Matthew, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there something that you would like to leave my audience with?
A big thank you for listening. And the one of the big takeaways for my film, which I mentioned, is when we care about each other for real, we do things differently and we have a lot
Mhm.
more compassion, empathy, and respect. And so I would love, to leave that, like, in our dealings with people. And I have to fight this every day too. Cause I'm Gen X. I was, raised to like, oh yeah, you want to go there? Let's go there. But it's like, all right, who does this serve? And,
Mhm.
and how can we, and this is the conflict resolution part. Like, it's always like, how can we create partnership and work together? So yeah, that, that's that.
All right. Matthew, thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you so much for telling us about both your film and your book. I know my audience has learned a lot. I'm going to, once again, all those links are going to be in the description section of both the audio and video platforms. Go watch the movie. Everybody's got Tubi. Everybody's got Tubi. Go watch the movie. And fellas and women, and everything in between. Go grab the book. Go grab the book and learn something. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great.
Once again, I want to thank Matthew Solomon for joining me for that very insightful and enlightening interview. I bring guests on here that are experts in their field to explain their field to people who are unfamiliar. And Matthew did a very good job of explaining the other side of policing, the institution of policing that some people want to deny or just don't want to hear about, and other people who are just saying, yep, that's definitely how police operate. Also talking about Me Too and women's safety. The most important thing that anybody can take away from this interview, aside from the excellent film and book that Matthew has written, is understanding that empathy is so vitally important to our everyday lives. This is something that I stand on business with every day of the week and every show and every interview. It's about understanding other people that are different from you, understanding their walk of life. And even though you might not be able to understand anything, to have empathy for whatever plight they've gone through, to not minimize it, to not put it down, to just shut up and listen and try to let it absorb into your mind, into your heart. That's empathy. That's understanding. That's what we should have for our fellow person. I'm not gonna say man or woman, for person, for people. That's how we actually move forward as a human race. And a lot of people are going to say all that tree hugging and stuff, and it is no good. And you liberals are always talking about that. That's not what America is. First of all, a lot of the people that say that are not tough. Okay, that's first and foremost. A lot of people that try to stand on that alpha American fake bravado aren't really tough. They talk a big game, but they're not really tough. If you confront them, they back down. There's no such thing as an alpha or a beta. We are alphas and betas depending on the circumstances. But what we are always, and what we should always be, as human beings who have empathy for one another. That's how we progress in society. And a lot of the things that Matthew was saying, right on the button. So get his work. In the description section of both the audio and video platform are all the links to not only his film, his book, his website. You can contact him yourself. You can send him an email and try to get more information and learn more about what he's teaching, what he's worked on, what he's doing. I implore everybody to do that because Matthew is speaking the real out here, and I'm glad to hear it. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for both listening and watching. And until next time, as always, I'll holla. Whew, that was a hell of a show. Thank you for rocking with us here on Unsolicited Perspectives with Bruce Anthony. Now, before you go, don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, comment, and share our podcast wherever you're listening or watching it to it. Pass it along to your friends. If you enjoy it, that means the people that you rock with will enjoy it also. So share the wealth, share the knowledge, share the noise. And for all those people that say, well, I don't have a YouTube. If you have a Gmail account, you have a YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can actually watch our video podcast. But the real party is on our Patreon page. After Hours Uncensored and Talking Straight-ish. After Hours Uncensored is another show with my sister. And once again, the key word there is uncensored. Those are exclusively on our Patreon page. Jump onto our website at unsolicitedperspective.com for all things us. That's where you can get all of our audio, video, our blogs, and even buy our merch. And if you're really feeling generous and want to help us out, you can donate on our donations page. Donations go strictly to improving our software and hardware so we can keep giving you guys good content that you can clearly listen to and that you can clearly see. So any donation would be appreciated. Most importantly, I want to say thank you for listening and watching and supporting us. And I'll catch you next time. Audi 5000. Peace.
The cycle stays the same. Freedom over cycle stays the same.